The ship landed with a deep hum and the doors opened to the warm, heavy air of Varec Prime. Velara stepped out first. She always did. She was Dominari tall, broad-shouldered with dark silver skin that caught the light like polished stone. Her eyes were gold, sharp and steady. She had fought in 3 wars, survived 2 of them before they were officially called wars, and had once held a collapsing tunnel ceiling with her bare hands long enough for 6 soldiers to crawl out. She was not someone people looked past, but they were not looking at her today. They were looking at the man who stepped out. Behind her, Calb Marsh was human. He was of average height, which meant he barely reached Velar's shoulder. He had brown skin, dark curly hair that needed cutting, and the kind of face that looked like it smiled often and meant it. He carried a small bag over one shoulder and a potted plant under his other arm, a stubborn little green thing with purple flowers that he had kept alive through 4 different star systems. The Dominari nobles waiting at the landing platform stared at him the way one might stare at a pet that had somehow wandered into a formal ceremony. Thara noticed. She always noticed. She said nothing. Caleb looked around at the towering buildings, the deep red sky, the hundreds of Dominari faces watching him from balconies and walkways above. Then he looked at the plant in his arms, adjusted it slightly so it wouldn't tip, and said quietly, mostly to himself, "Beautiful place." He meant it. That was the strange thing about him. He always meant it. The quarters they were given were large and cold. Dominari architecture was built for Dominari bodies, high ceilings, wide doorways, furniture carved from black stone. Calb walked through the room, slowly touching things lightly, the way he touched most things. He set his plan on the window ledge where the light was best. Then he unpacked his bag, a few clothes, a medical kit, 3 books, a folded photograph, and a small packet of seeds. Though watched him from the doorway. "You brought seeds," she said. "I always bring seeds," he said, not looking up. "You never know when a place will need something green." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. This happened often with Calb, he said. Things that were so simple they felt like they should mean nothing, and yet they sat in her mind for hours. Afterward, they had been married for 7 months. It had been arranged politically, formally, with all the cold precision of a treaty. The Dominari High Council had suggested it, and Velara had accepted because refusing would have looked like weakness, and she did not do weakness. The humans were a young species newly admitted to the outer rings of the Galactic Accord, giving them a symbolic connection to a Dominari. Family was meant to be a gesture, a small, meaningless gesture. She had expected Caleb to be difficult or fragile or desperate to impress her. He was none of those things. He was just a Caleb. The first formal dinner was a test. Everyone in the room knew it, even if no one said so. 40 Dominari nobles sat around a long stone table. They were warriors, diplomats, scholars, all of them larger than any human, all of them with the quiet arrogance of a species that had never truly lost a war on its own soil. They had invited Velara and her human husband as a courtesy, the kind of courtesy that has teeth in it. Calb sat beside Velara and looked at the food, most of which was not made for human biology, and quietly asked the server what was safe for him to eat. He did it without embarrassment. The server, a young Dominari girl who had probably never spoken to a human Before went wittied and then carefully pointed out 3 dishes. Kalb thanked her by name. He had already learned her name. He had learned it while walking to the table. The noble across from them, heavy bill male named Doro, leaned forward. So Doro said in the common tongue, "You are the human. I am a human," Kalb said pleasantly. "There are quite a few of us." Doro smiled in a way that wasn't friendly. "Your kind is very small." "Yes," Kalb agreed. He took a careful bite of something pale and chewed it thoughtfully. "Good thing the universe doesn't charge by the kilogram." There was a silence. Then from somewhere down the table, someone made a sound that might have been a laugh. Quickly swallowed. Doro's smile did not change. "You do not seem frightened being here among us." Kalb looked up at him. His eyes were calm and dark and very direct. "Should I be?" Doro had no good answer for that. He looked away first. Vila, who had been watching all of this from the corner of her eye, took a slow sip of her drink and thought, "Interesting." In the days that followed, Kalb did what Kalb always did. He learned the place. He walked the corridors of the court at odd hours, nodding at guards who were not used to being nodded at. He found the kitchens and made friends with the staff by asking genuine questions about the food. He discovered that one of the senior advisors had a bad knee from an old injury and brought him a small wrapped compress one morning without being asked, explaining quietly that heat helped. The advisor, who had never been tended to by anyone, let alone a human, was so startled he forgot to be dismissive. The plant on the window ledge began to grow. Velara noticed all of it. She was trained to notice things. What she could not figure out was how he did it. How person who was by every measurable standard at the bottom of the power scale in this building moved through it with such complete ease. He was not performing confidence. He was not pretending. He simply did not seem to register the hostility around him as something that required a response. She asked him about it one evening when they were sitting on the balcony watching the red sun go down. "Does it not bother you?" she said. "How they look at you?" Kalb thought about it for a moment, genuinely thought about it the way he did with most questions, as if he believed the question deserved real consideration. "Some of them are curious," he said. "Some of them are rude. Some of them are scared, which is funny because I'm the smallest thing on the planet." He paused. "People look at unfamiliar things strangely. It doesn't mean much. They look at you like you are less." Velara said. She had not meant to say it so directly. It came out before she could shape it into something more diplomatic. Kalb glanced at her. "I know," he said. "But what they think of me and what I am are 2 different things. I don't need them to match." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the sky. She did not say anything else, but she thought about those words for a very long time. High Consul came to the court on the 14th day. He was the one who had suggested the arrangement, Velara's marriage to a human in the first place. He was tall even by Dominari standards, old and sharpied with the practice smile of someone who had been winning political games since before was born. He greeted her warmly in front of everyone. He congratulated her on her union. He said all the right words in all the right order. Then he looked at Kalb. "So this is the human spouse," he said loudly enough for the room to hear. He looked Kalb up and down slowly, making a performance of it. "I must say, you are exactly what I imagined." Kalb looked at him with polite Attention, I hope that's a good thing. Konsulek circled him slightly, the way a much larger animal might consider something small. Tell me, do you find it difficult living here among people so far above your species' development? The room went quiet. People were watching. This was the moment Vrek had built, the small cruelty dressed up as curiosity, designed to humiliate Velara through her husband. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then he said in a perfectly easy voice, I've been in rooms before where I was the least impressive person there. Console. It's a comfortable place to be. Actually, no one expects much, so everything you do is a surprise. He smiled, a real smile. I find I get a lot done. He let that sit for exactly 1 second, then he said, you know, I met a man once who told me I wasn't worth his time. That was about 11 years ago. He's not around anymore. I'm still here. He tilted his head slightly. Isn't that funny? He said it pleasantly, as if he were commenting on the weather. Brethek's smile did not waver, but something behind his eyes did. Calb excused himself politely, said he wanted to check on his plant, and walked out of the room. The silence he left behind was the loudest thing in it. Thara did not follow him immediately. She stood where she was and looked at the space where her husband had been standing. She had watched him walk into a room full of the most powerful people on the planet and leave it quietly, having won something, without raising his voice, without making a threat, without doing anything that could be pointed to and called aggression. She did not yet have a word for what he had done. Later that night she sat on the edge of their bed in the dark and watched him sleep. He slept easily, the way he did everything without fighting it. His breathing was slow and even. He looked in the low light, very small, very human, very soft. She thought about the man he had mentioned. He's not around anymore. I'm still here. She thought about how he had said it, not with bitterness, not with pride, just simply as a fact. She looked at his hands resting on the blanket, healer's hands. She had watched them work, compress onto an old man's knee with the same easy care they used to hold a fragile plant. They did not look like dangerous hands. She was beginning to suspect that had nothing to do with anything outside the window. His plant turned slowly toward the moonlight, reaching for something the way growing things do. Vithura sat in the dark for a long time. She was not afraid of very much in this universe, but she was starting to think she did not know her husband at all, and for the first time in a very long time that feeling was not an unpleasant one. The convoy ship was called the Verth's Pride, and it was not built for comfort. It was a diplomatic vessel, wide and armored, designed to cross contested frontier space without looking like a warship, while being just armored enough to survive one. Velara had traveled on. Worse, Calb had never traveled on anything like it, but he had explored the entire ship within the first 6 hours, introduced himself to the crew, and found the one small porthole near the engine room that gave the best view of open space. He stood there sometimes when the stars were thick outside the glass and just looked. Velara found him there on the second day out. She stood beside him and said nothing, and he said nothing either, and somehow it was not uncomfortable. That was another thing about Calb. He did not feel silences because he was nervous. He only spoke when he had something to say. After a while he said, I used to think space would feel empty when I finally got out. Here it felt the opposite, full of Everything, it is dangerous, she said. Most full things are, he said. She looked at the side of his face. He was watching the stars with that quiet attention he gave to everything, plants, conversations, wounded advisors with bad knees. It was the same look every time, total and unhurried. She looked back out the porthole and thought that this might be one of the stranger aspects of being married to a human. They made ordinary moments feel heavier somehow, like they had more inside them than they showed. The attack came on the fourth day in the dark hours, when most of the ship was sleeping. It was fast and it was professional. A pirate vessel, old but modified well, dropped out of a blind spot in the sensor range and fired 3 concentrated bursts at the Verath's pride before anyone on the bridge could react. The first burst took out the main propulsion, the second hit the communication array and bent it sideways like a broken arm. The third caught the crew quarters at an angle and sent a pressure wave through the entire ship that threw people out of their bunks and cracked 3 of the 6 Dominari guards against the corridor walls. Thara was awake and moving before the lights failed. She had her weapon drawn before the emergency lighting came on. Dull orange glow that made everything look like the inside of a furnace. She was already calling out orders when she turned and realized she could not hear responses. The guards who could answer did. There were 2 of them still standing. Other 4 were down, 2 unconscious. One with a broken arm folded the wrong way, one with a deep cut across her torso that was bleeding badly. The bridge was damaged. The pilot was alive, but had struck his head and was not fully conscious. The co-pilot was trying to reach someone on the broken communicator, getting nothing back, and the pirates were still out there, circling. Velara was doing 3 calculations at once: threat assessment, crew condition, defense options, when she noticed something. Kalb was already at the injured guard's side. He had not gone for a weapon. He had gone for his bag, which he had apparently grabbed in the first seconds of the attack, and he was kneeling beside the bleeding guard. With complete focus, his hands were moving. He had the medical kit open. He was talking quietly to the guard, low and steady, in a voice that somehow cut through the noise without being loud. "Stay with me," he was saying. "Look at me. Tell me your name again." "I know it. I just want to hear you say it." The guard, a young female named Sarah, who had never spoken more than 10 words to Kalb, looked at him with wide, pained eyes and said her name. "Good." Kalb said, "Sarah, good. I need you to press here hard with your hand, not that hand, the other one, your good one. Yes, like that. Don't let up." He turned briefly and caught Velar's eye. His face was calm, not calm the way stone is calm, not blank, not absent, but the deliberate calm of someone who has decided that right now, this is what calm looks like, because anything else makes things worse. "How many attackers?" he said. "1 ship," Velara said. "Circling, waiting. They'll want to board, not destroy," he said, already turning back to Sarah. "If they wanted us dead, we'd be dead. They want cargo or hostages." He paused. "How long do you need to prepare a defense?" 40 minutes, if I can get 2 working guards and reroute power to the rear shields. I'll get you 40 minutes, he said. Then to himself quietly, "And I'll figure out the power thing." He said it the way someone says they'll get to the dishes after dinner, straightforward, unconcerned. The next 40 minutes were the strangest of life. She had been in battles with things that wanted to kill her and tried seriously to do so. She knew what her own body felt like under pressure, the sharpening, the speed, the way everything else fell away. She knew how to function in chaos. Calb, she discovered, functioned in a completely different way. He did not sharpen, he slowed down. She watched him work as she moved through the ship, organizing the two capable guards. Calb went from the injured guard to the unconscious ones, checking each quickly, making fast decisions. This one's stable, that one needs to be turned, this one has a concussion and must not sleep. He moved his medical kit around like a traveling workshop, using things in ways they were not labeled for, cutting strips from his own jacket to reinforce a bandage. He ran out of the right material. Then, when the medical crisis was stable, he went to the engine room. She found him there 20 minutes later, lying on his back under a panel that should have required a trained engineer to access, doing something with 2 sets of wires and a piece of equipment she did not recognize. What is that? She said. This is a water filtration component from the galley. He said, I'm using it as a voltage regulator. Probably it might also just make everything worse, but I think it'll work. You think? I think. He agreed. 60-40 in our favor. She stared at him. Calb, it'll work, he said more quietly. I just say 60-40 so I don't tempt anything. 3 minutes later, the rear shields came back online. Not at full power, but enough. She did not ask him how. She was not sure she wanted to. No, the pirate ship made its boarding approach 22 minutes after the initial attack. It did not find the disabled, helpless diplomatic vessel it was expecting. What it found was a ship with just enough defensive capability to make boarding extremely costly. A Dominari warrior who had spent the intervening time turning a damaged corridor into an excellent kill zone, and a 2-guard defense that held long enough for the pirate crew to decide this particular prize was not worth the losses. The pirate ship pulled back. It did not leave its circled waiting, but it did not come in. And 47 minutes after that, a passing trade freighter picked up the distress signal that Calb had managed to transmit using the bent communication array and a sequence of short pulses. Not the standard format, but a pattern that any ship with a human crew member would recognize. Old Earth maritime code, converted to light pulses, 1,700 years old and still useful. The rescue ship arrived within the hour. Later, when the injured were being transferred to the rescue vessel, when the guards were stable and Sarah was awake and the pilot had recovered enough to be embarrassed about being unconscious during his own crisis, went looking for Calb. She found him in the small cargo hold near the rear of the ship, sitting on a crate in the dark. His medical kit was on the floor, open and used. His jacket was torn where he had cut the strips from it. His hands were resting on his knees. They were shaking, not violently, not in a way that anyone who did not know him would notice, just a small fine trembling in both hands, like a string that has been pulled tight for too long and is slowly releasing. He looked up when she entered. He did not try to hide it. Is everyone all right? He said. Yes, she said. Sarah will need real care, but she will recover. The others are stable. He let out a slow breath. Good. He looked down at his hands. I'll be fine in a minute. It does this after. She sat down on a crate across from him. The emergency lighting was still on. making everything orange and dim. You were afraid. She said it was not an accusation, it was an observation. The whole time he said you did not show it. I know. He turned his hands over, looked at them, snorts. There's a time for being afraid and a time for doing the thing. I've just had a lot of practice separating those two. He paused. My grandmother called it keeping the fear in your pocket. You don't throw it away, you just put it somewhere it won't get in the way. Vila thought about that, and when you are done doing the thing, she said slowly, you take it back out. Yeah, he said, and you let it shake your hands for a little while. She looked at him for a long time, at the torn jacket, at the shaking hands, at the face that had been for 47 minutes. The comms thing on a ship that was falling apart. She thought about all the things she had believed about humans. Small, short-lived, physically weak, biologically unremarkable. She was finding steadily and without much warning that none of those things meant what she had thought they meant. She did not speak for a while, then she reached across the space between them and put her large hand over both of his. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would have added to it. His hands, after a little while, stopped shaking. Outside the hold, the stars moved on, full of everything. Her name was Darv, and she was a scholar. She was not the kind of scholar who sat in a quiet room and read old documents. She was the kind who chased questions the way some people chase trouble with too much energy, not enough caution, and a complete inability to stop once she started. She had spent 16 years studying the biological histories of newly admitted accord species. She was very good at her work. She was also, most of her colleagues agreed, slightly exhausting when she heard about the convoy incident, about the human who had held a damaged ship together with field medicine and improvised engineering, while a dominary warrior fought off pirates. She had gone still in the way. She only went still when something had snagged her attention completely. That was 3 weeks ago. She had not stopped since. The archive world of Saravel was a planet that existed almost entirely to hold information. Its surface was covered in great low buildings that hummed with stored data, and its population was mostly scholars, archivists, and the support staff who kept them functioning. It was, in Dar's opinion, the finest place in the known galaxy. She had been here for 2 weeks when she requested a meeting with Vilara. Vilara came alone, which was not typical for a Dominari diplomat, but she had read the request twice, and something in it had made her want to come without her formal guard. She arrived in Darv's workspace, a long room buried under several feet of archive building, lit by cool white light and absolutely covered in documents, and found the scholar standing in the center of the room, looking like someone who had just opened a box and was not sure if she should be frightened or fascinated. Thank you for coming, Darv said. What did you find? Vilara said she had not come for pleasantries. Darv looked at her for a moment, then she said, sit down. Vilara raised an eyebrow. Dominari did not generally take instructions from scholars, but something in Dar's voice made her pull a chair from the nearest table and sit. Dar turned to the large display surface behind her and began. I started with your husband, she said. That seemed like the right place given recent events. Humans are a young species. Your accord file on them is thin, so I went looking for the source material, human records, their own histories. She Paused. I should tell you that I am a professional and I have studied the histories of 41 species in my career. I say that so you understand that what I am about to tell you is not something I say easily. Velara waited. Their history, Darv said, is the most consistently terrible thing I have ever read. She put up the first document. It was a human timeline, stretched across the display surface. Thousands of years long, dense with events. Start here, Derv said, pointing near the beginning. This is the first recorded major extinction event in their history, a geological event. Part of it was natural, part was caused by human activity. A significant portion of their population died. What did the survivors do? Retreated, Velara said. Regrouped. Rebuilt, Derf said. Within 2 centuries, they were larger in number than before it happened. Here she moved her hand. Another collapse. This one was a disease, a single pathogen that spread across every connected population center. They had killed a third of the people in the most densely populated regions. Took decades to burn out. She paused. They described this in their historical records as a tragedy that changed the world, and then the next entry is about what they built in the century that followed. Veether studied the timeline. How many of these events are there on this scale? Dar said, for that qualify as near extinction, dozens that qualify as civilization ending in specific regions, and those are just the natural and biological ones. She pressed a key. The display changed. These are the wars. Vila looked at the new data for a long time. The wars were not occasional. They were near constant, not everywhere, not always. Humans had known peace in places and times, but the pattern was of a species that had spent most of its history in conflict with itself, and the scale of it grew as the species grew. The later wars were enormous. Millions, tens of millions. The numbers were not unusual by the scale of galactic warfare, but the context was these were humans fighting humans, the same species, on the same small world with the same biology and the same basic needs. They nearly destroyed themselves, Veeler said. More than once, Dar said, hear this. Period. They developed weapons capable of ending all complex life on their planet. They pointed those weapons at each other. For nearly a century, there was one specific day she pulled up a smaller file where the devices were closer to being used than any time before or after. A single human, a military officer, received a signal indicating an attack was incoming. The system was malfunctioning. It was a false alarm. But the signal said it was real, and his orders were to report it immediately and prepare for response. What happened? He decided, Dar said, that it was wrong. He had no proof. He had only his sense that something was off, and he chose not to report it. He sat with that decision alone in a small room for 23 minutes while everything around him said the attack was real. She paused. He was right. It was a malfunction. His decision is credited with preventing a war that would have ended their species. Vila was quiet. He was not celebrated. For this, Darv continued, he was reprimanded for not following procedure. He spent most of his remaining life in relative obscurity. Humans only began to understand what he had done decades later. The room was very quiet. Why are you telling me this story specifically? Velora asked. Dar looked at her. Because I want you to understand what kind of species produces that kind of person, a person who alone in the dark, with everything telling him to act in One Direction decides to trust something. Quieter than fear, she let that sit for a moment. That is not an accident of character, that is what their history makes. Though came home late, Calb was in the main room reading. He had made tea. He made tea the way other people breathe, automatically and without thought, and he had left a cup on the table where she usually sat, which meant he had known she was coming back to sit there before she had known it herself. She sat, she picked up the tea, she looked at him, he looked up from his book. Long day, I spoke with a scholar. She said she had been studying human history. Oh, Calb said. He put the book down. He did not ask what Dar had said, he just waited. In that way, he had to see what Velara needed from the moment. Your history, she said slowly, it is very heavy. He considered that word. Yeah, he said it is. The diseases, the wars, the near extinctions. She held the tea with both hands. You nearly ended yourselves. Many times, we're very good at nearly. He said there was no bitterness in it. Not so good at actually, which I suppose is the important part. Does it not weigh on you knowing what your species has done to itself? Calb was quiet for a moment. He looked at the steam rising from his own cup. It weighs on everyone differently, he said. Some people carry it with a lot of anger, some with a lot of shame. I carry it more like. He paused, choosing carefully, like knowing where I come from. You can't change it, you can just decide what you do next. The scholar told me about a man, Velara said, military officer who sat alone with a decision that could have ended everything and chose the harder, quieter thing. Calb nodded slowly. He knew the story every human did. That is what she said. Your history makes said people like that. He looked at her then. His expression was hard to read, not closed, but complex in the way that meant something real was moving underneath it. I don't know if I'd have done what he did, Calb said quietly. I'd like to think so, but he was something specific. I'm just a botanist who learned some field medicine. You are a human, she said, who learned some field medicine. He was quiet. She said something else. Velara continued. She said your history is the most consistently terrible thing she has ever studied. She said that as a fact, not an insult. I know, Calb said, and then she said stopped. She looked at the table. She said she has studied 41 species, and none of them came through what your species came through, and are still here. Still building things, still planting seeds in other people's gardens. She looked up. She said she did not know whether that was hopeful or frightening. Calb was quiet for a long time. It's both, he said finally. I think it's always been both. Velara looked at him, at his ordinary face and his careful hands and his small potted plants still growing on the window ledge, having survived 4 star systems and a pirate attack and whatever else the universe had aimed at it. She thought about all the things she had believed when she first saw him step off the ship. She had thought harmless. She understood now that she had been reading the wrong word entirely. Harmless was the wrong word for something that had crawled through catastrophe after catastrophe and come out the other side still reaching for sunlight. The right word was something she did not have in her language. She was not sure any language had it, but she was starting to think she understood it. It lived somewhere in the space between terrifying and wonderful, and it had brown skin and dark curly hair, and it made tea without being asked. Outside, the plant turned toward the Light, it had put out a new leaf while she had been away. She had not even noticed it growing, that she was beginning to understand was very human. No one saw them coming. That was the first thing. The pale fleet did not announce itself, did not send signals, did not follow any of the approach patterns that Accord sensor networks were built to detect. They simply appeared at the edge of the Verarak system one morning, the way a shadow appears when a cloud moves, not arriving. Exactly, more like being revealed. There were 43 ships. They were old. Not old the way antique things are old, with visible wear and the charm of history. Old the way deep water is old the way mountain is old, the kind of old that exists before memory. Their hulls were a color that did not translate well to any known visual spectrum, a pale, flat, almost colorless shade that gave them their name. No markings, no drive signatures that matched anything on record, no life signs. They were automated. The entire fleet was automated. This was in many ways worse. Dominari High Council convened within the hour. Thara was in the chamber. She had been called back from the outer districts where she had been working and had arrived to find the room full of generals and diplomats, all speaking at once with a particular kind of loud energy that meant no one had answers, and everyone was covering that fact with noise. The pale fleet had not fired. It had not moved. It sat at the system's edge with the patient stillness of something that had been waiting a very long time and had learned that time was not a resource it needed to spend carefully. A hail went out, a standard Accord greeting in 6 languages. The fleet responded. The response was a list. It came through clean and clear in every language simultaneously, as if the fleet systems had no trouble with translation. The list was long and clinical and read the way a very old inventory might read. It was a list of species, known civilizations, extinct and living, organized by biological classification. The Dominari were on it, fourth from the top. Their classification was marked with a small symbol that, when translated, meant something like primary elimination. Target, the humans were not on the list at all. That was what Kalb noticed when someone finally thought to tell him. He had not been in the council chamber. He had been told politely and with genuine discomfort that the situation was a Dominari military matter. He had not argued. He had nodded, gone back to their quarters, sat at the table and read the full public transmission 3 times. Then he had gone very still. Villara found him 2 hours later, still at the table, but now surrounded by documents, not physical ones, but screens, projections, data pulled from the Accord network, human military records, a star chart of the system with the fleet position marked. He had also made tea, which he had not drunk because it had gone cold an hour ago while he was working. Kalb, she said. He looked up. His eyes were sharp and focused in a way she recognized now. It was the convoy look, the fear in the pocket. Look, they don't have us on their list, he said. I know, she said. That means their sensors see us as what? Unclassified, unknown. He looked back at the star chart. Or they know about us and made a decision. Their records predate human space travel, said Villara. Our analysts believe they were programmed before humanity reached the stars. You were not considered a factor. Good, Kalb said. She looked at him. Good. He stood up. I need to use the comm system, the full range one, not the local channel. Can you get me Accessible. He looked at her directly. I know this is a dominari military situation. I know. I'm not a general or a diplomat or a weapons officer, but I am a human with full-range communications access, and there are human ships in this sector, and I need to make some calls. He paused. Let me work. She looked at him for a long moment, then she took him to the communications room. He was gone for 6 hours. She fought during those 6 hours, not against the Pale Fleet. It still had not moved, but against the chaos inside Verac Prime's command structure. 3 different military factions were proposing 3 different responses. One wanted an immediate strike, which her analysts said would trigger full fleet response before Dominari defenses were ready. One wanted evacuation, which was logistically impossible in the time available. One wanted negotiation, which required the fleet to be something that could negotiate. It was not going well, and then the Pale Fleet moved, not at the planet, not yet. It sent a single lead ship forward. Slowly, a deliberate approach that felt less like an attack and more like a demonstration. We are coming. This is what coming looks like. Begin preparing your response. The arrogance of something that had never encountered meaningful resistance. Vila was in the war room when her comm unit lit up. It was Caleb. His voice was calm. He was in the communications room. Still, she could hear the hum of equipment behind him. I've got 12 human vessels within response range, he said. 3 military, 9 commercial. The commercial ones won't fight, but they'll carry people, which solves your evacuation math. The military ones, he paused. You need to talk to Commander Reyes. She's at the edge of the system with the Tan 3rd Fleet. Snorts. She's been there for 2 days running drills. She picked up the Pale Fleet arrival at the same time your sensors did. Vara stared at her comm unit. How did you contact her? I called, he said. She answered. She's been waiting to hear from someone who wasn't panicking. A pause. She has a plan, Calb said. It's my plan. Actually, I sketched it out about an hour ago. Snorts. She called it insane, but probably correct, which is generally how I know something will work. Another pause. I need you to get me into the war room. The Dominari generals had the same reaction to Calb that everyone always had at first. They looked at him the way the court had looked at him when he stepped off the ship, like something small that had wandered somewhere it didn't belong. He ignored this in the same way he always ignored it, completely and without apparent effort. He put his star chart on the main display. It was hand-marked. Added to, built over 6 hours of communication and calculation. It was not a military document. It was something more like a diagram made by someone who understood systems, not weapon systems, but systems, networks, connections, the way things move when you redirect them instead of stopping them. The fleet is automated, Calb said. It follows a program. We don't know everything about the program, but we know one thing. It has a list, and we know what's on it, which means we know what it's targeting and in what order. He pointed at the chart. It's not going to scatter. It's going to move in a specific pattern because it was built to move in a specific pattern. And if you know how something moves, you can be where it's going before it gets there, said one of the younger generals. She was staring at the chart. No, Caleb said, you can be where it's not going, and you can use what it's not targeting to move what it is targeting out of the way. He laid out the plan. It took 11 minutes, The room was completely silent, the core of it was. The automated fleet had no entry. For humans in its threat matrix, human ships could approach it, could fly close to it, around it, through its formation, without triggering its defensive response, and if human ships moved in a specific pattern at specific points in the fleet's approach vector, they could act as a physical guide, not blocking the fleet, not fighting it, redirecting it like moving water with your hands, not stopping the flow but reshaping where it goes. The fleet would be guided into a gravitational trajectory that would add enough time to its approach for full Dominari defenses to come online. And while the Pale Fleet corrected its course, which it would because it was a program and programs correct, Commander Ray's and the Tan Third Fleet would hit its lead ship hard enough to create a disruption that would trigger a system reset, an ancient automated weapon brought low not by superior firepower, but by a species it hadn't bothered to account for. This is not a guaranteed outcome, Calb said when he was done. I want to be honest about that, but it's the best outcome available, and the window for using it is closing. The war room was quiet. Then the oldest general in the room said very slowly, "Get Commander Ray's on the channel." Vila went back to the front line. She was not built to sit in a war room. She was built for the thing itself, the sharp end of it, where bodies and weapons met. And something was decided. She took her 2 guards and went to the orbital defense platforms where the Pale Fleet's lead ship was now visible in the upper atmosphere, huge and pale and old. Her comm was open to Calb's channel. She could hear him in the background, coordinating, relaying, adjusting, speaking to 12 different ships in 2 different languages with the same quiet steadiness he used for everything. She thought the lead ship had defense systems, even automated ones, and they were not passive. 3 of the orbital platforms took damage before Ray's fleet came in from the far approach, fast and hard and very loud. Thyra was in the middle of a corridor defense when her comm crackled. Calb's voice, "I've got you," he said. "Keep moving." She did not stop. She did not slow down, but something in her chest moved, some held thing releasing, and she kept fighting with the knowledge, settled and certain, that the communications room had not let anything fall apart while she was handling the sharp end. The lead ship systems reset 42 minutes later. The Pale Fleet, without a functioning lead unit, went into a holding pattern, not gone, but still paused, a program without its first instruction. The Dominari defense grid fully online now, locked onto every ship in the fleet. Stalemate, but stalemate was not death. Stalemate was time, and time was, as it turned out, exactly what humanity had always been best at: surviving. Commander Ray's voice came over the channel. She sounded exactly the way Calb sounded, calm, focused, already thinking about the next thing. "Your husband," she said to Velara, "drew this on a napkin." Velara looked across the war room to where Calb was still at his station, still coordinating, still talking to someone. "I know," she said. "He's either very clever or very lucky." Rai said. Vilder watched him. "He is very human," she said. A pause. Then Ray said, quietly, with something in her voice that sounded like recognition, "Yeah, that's what I said." The aftermath was slow, the way aftermaths always are. The Pale Fleet was neutralized over the following weeks, not destroyed, because no one quite had the firepower to do that. efficiently, and no one wanted to risk the debris, but dismantled by degrees. Small teams worked through each ship. Carefully, they were old things, it turned out, built by a civilization so long gone that no one in the current accord could identify the makers. The ships had simply been running their program for thousands of years, moving through the dark, eliminating what they were told to eliminate, waiting for the next target with the patience of something that did not need sleep or hope or any reason to keep going except the instructions it had been given at the very beginning. The scholars found this deeply sad. The generals found it deeply unsettling. Calb, when told about it, was quiet for a moment and then said it reminded him of something from an old human story, a soldier who kept fighting a war for decades after it ended because no one had told him it was over. He said it with his usual gentleness, as if even ancient automated extinction machines deserved some small consideration. Valera had stopped being surprised by this. She had instead started to find it one of her favorite things about him. The political consequences arrived quickly and loudly. High Consulak, who had built the political arrangement of marriage to Calb specifically as a public humiliation, proof that she was being saddled with something useless, something beneath a true dominari warrior, found himself in a position that had no dignified exits. The human he had dismissed had coordinated the defense of the dominari home world. The humans' contacts had provided the ships that bought enough time for the planetary shields to come online. The humans' plan, drawn on a napkin in a communications room, had been the only idea in the war room that any of the generals had been willing to try. There is a particular kind of political silence that falls when a plan has worked too well and too publicly to be argued with. Vrek experienced this silence for approximately 3 days. Then the formal review began, not of the battle. The battle was considered and analyzed and would be studied for years. The review was of Rethak's conduct in the events leading up to the battle, the arrangement he had made, the way he had used a political union as a weapon of humiliation. The Dominari did not look kindly on wasted resources, and they were beginning to understand very slowly and with some difficulty that they had nearly wasted an extraordinary one. Vrethak retired from public life within the month. He cited health reasons. No one believed him. No one said so. 3 months after the battle, the Galactic Accord convened a session that had not been seen in 200 years, a full peer review, a formal assembly at which the status of a species within the Accord was to be reconsidered. The species under consideration was humanity. Valera sat in the gallery and listened to the arguments, most of which she had already heard in some form, and most of which were true. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that their Accord classification did not account for. Not military capabilities. Specifically, they were not taken as a whole the most powerful fighting force in the known galaxy, but the convoy incident, the battle for Verarak Prime, the work of individual humans in both. These pointed to something that resisted easy categorization. They were adaptable, they were creative. In conditions that broke other species, they were most unusually worked in a way that felt almost biological. Human on one side of the galaxy could reach a human on the other side in ways that went beyond technology. Something instinctive and fast and effective, and they were kind in ways that also resisted categorization. The young Dominari server girl who had pointed out which dishes were safe for Caleb to eat had told this story to her family, who had told it to others, and it had traveled in the way small true stories travel. The injured guard, Sarah, who had looked into a human face during the worst minutes of her life and heard her name said with care, had requested assignment to the diplomatic corps. She wanted, she said, to understand them better. These were not military victories, they were something else, something that went into the Accord's recommendation alongside all the strategic assessments and the tactical analysis. Humanity was granted full peer species recognition at the end of the session. The vote was not close. A young diplomat came to speak with. Afterward, she was Dominari, recently graduated, working her first posting. She had that particular combination of formal bearing and barely concealed eagerness that young diplomats always had when they had just witnessed something they would tell stories about. She asked Velara for a moment, and Velara gave it to her because she remembered what it was like to be young and to have just seen something you could not yet put into words. I wanted to ask, the young diplomat said carefully, what it is like being married to a human. Velara looked at her. This was a question she had been asked in various forms by various people for months now. Some asked it with curiosity, some with discomfort, some with the poorly concealed envy of people who had just watched someone accidentally acquire something valuable. She thought about the question honestly. Not the public answer, the true one. When I first brought him here, she said slowly, I thought I knew what he was. Small, gentle, not a threat to anything. Something I could be fond of from a comfortable distance. She paused. I thought his gentleness was the most important thing about him. I thought it meant he was simple. The young diplomat waited. I was wrong, Vilthera said. His gentleness is not the most important thing about him. It is the most difficult thing about him. He comes from a history that would have made most species sharp and hard and dangerous in a very straightforward way, and instead, he is the way he is. She looked at the young diplomat steadily. Do you understand the difference? The diplomat thought about it. One is what he is, she said slowly. The other is what he chose. Yes, Velara said. She did not add anything to it. Some things were complete the way they were. She found him in the garden. It had expanded considerably since the first small plant on the window ledge. It had started with Calb simply putting seeds into soil wherever he could find it and waiting. Then the kitchen staff had started asking him questions, then the younger guards, then quietly and without announcement, a patch of ground near the east wall of their quarters had been cleared and turned, and people had started bringing seeds of their own from their own worlds, asking if he thought things would grow here. He always thought they would. He was usually right. Velara stood in the doorway and watched him. He was kneeling near a row of something with silver-green leaves that he had told her was from a Dominari coastal region, a wild plant not usually cultivated, that he had persuaded to grow in the courtyard through a combination of patient soil work and what she suspected was a great deal of quiet conversation directed at the plants themselves. He was talking to it now in a low voice. She could not hear what he was saying. She watched him for a while. She thought about the first night she had sat in the dark and watched him sleep, and thought fragile. She thought about the convoy and his shaking hands in the hold, and the way fear had sat patiently in his pocket while he did what needed doing. She thought about the archive world and Dar's careful, terrible history and Kalb saying it's both, it's always been both. She thought about the war room and the napkin and Commander raised his voice saying, "That's what I said." She thought about 6 hours of silence while he called 12 ships and built a plan and never once asked anyone to tell him it was going to be all right. He looked up and saw her. He smiled, the easy, real smile that had not changed all the time she had known him. "There's tea," he said. "I know," she said. "There is always tea." He stood up, brushing soil from his hands. "How did it go, the session?" "Full recognition," she said. "Unanimous, nearly." He was quiet for a moment, then he looked back at the plants. "Huh," he said. Not triumphant, not even particularly surprised, just huh, the sound of someone filing information away the way he filed everything, calmly, without fuss. She crossed the garden and stood beside him. They looked at the silver green plant together. It had put out 3 new leaves since the last time she had looked. She had stopped being surprised by how things grew around him. "Kalb," she said. "I called you gentle once," she said. "When we first arrived here, I said it in my head. I thought it was the right word." He glanced at her. "It is not the wrong word," she said carefully. "But I did not understand what it cost. Gentleness in something that has been through what your species has been through. It is not softness." She paused. "It is the hardest thing I have ever seen." He was quiet for a long time. The garden was warm. Something with small yellow flowers was nodding in a light breeze near the wall. She did not know what it was called or where he had found it. She had stopped needing to know. It was his and it grew. And that was enough. "My grandmother used to say something," he said finally. "She said the easiest thing in the world is to become what hurts you, to get hard when the world is hard, to get cold when it's cold." He looked at the plants. She said, "The interesting choice is the other one." Vila thought about that. "Interesting choice," she repeated. "The harder one," he said, "the one that takes something." She nodded slowly. She was a wise woman. She was terrifying. Kalb said warmly, "You would have liked her." Vilara found unexpectedly that she smiled. It was not a warrior's smile or a diplomat's smile. It was the kind that came from somewhere quieter, somewhere she did not show most people. "I think I would have," she said. They stood together in the garden as the light changed around them. Somewhere beyond the east wall, the city of Verarak Prime was going on with its business, recovering, rebuilding, processing what had happened to it and what that meant. Somewhere out in the system, the last of the pale fleet ships were being carefully, methodically taken apart by people who were still learning what they had almost lost. And here in a courtyard garden that had started with a single stubborn plant and a packet of seeds, 2 people stood in the growing light. One of them was the most decorated Dominari diplomat of her generation, who had held a tunnel ceiling with her bare hands and never lost a war. And one of them was a human botanist and former field medic who had no idea he was extraordinary and who would be embarrassed and confused if anyone told him so, and who would then make tea and get back to work. She had married him as a gesture, a small, meaningless gesture. She did not have the right word yet for what it was now. But she was in no hurry. She thought, a great deal of time to find it, and if she ran out of time, she knew Someone very good at making the most of what was available. She looked at him. He was already back on his knees in the soil, talking quietly to something small and green and new. She went inside to find the tea he had already made for her. It was still warm. It was always still warm, that she had decided was as close to magic as the universe needed to be.